Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Storytellers Project live in your house. I'm Kaila White. I am a journalist with the Arizona Republic and azcentral.com in Phoenix, where I have been heavily involved in the Arizona Storytellers Project for about 4 years. I will be the host of your show for tonight. I am subbing in for the Storytellers Project's founder and director, Megan Finnerty, and I am so excited to be here, not only because I'm passionate about the project, but I'm so excited to bring a show like this to you. First off, let me say thank you for tuning in and taking a risk on, spending some time in your evening watching a show like this, taking a chance on live storytelling. But I'm really excited because hearing and connecting with other stories helps us connect with our communities. So as you know, the Storytellers Project normally produces more than 100 shows every year across the country featuring live true stories. But as I'm sure you know as well, they have had to postpone their shows through September. So as part of the USA Today Network's response to the coronavirus, they are producing these live stream shows, including this one. So for this show, they have hand-selected 5 tellers who have already told their stories among more than 1,000 tellers across the country to share their stories with you tonight. So actually, why don't we bring up those 5 tellers right now and give them a little wave and welcome them. This is Bethany Iser, Stacy Sullivan, Lynn, Sierra Holmes, and Anwar Newton. Hi, everybody. This show tonight. I don't know about you. I love TED Talks. Tonight's not a TED Talk. Tonight is not a motivational speaker. It's not a sales pitch. Instead, tonight's show is storytelling. And that's a lot like visiting a friend. You sit down with someone you're trying to get closer to and you open your heart and mind to what they're telling you. And so we ask that you do that tonight. You see, some of the stories you're going to hear will be more polished and professional. Some might be more casual and conversational. And we ask that you receive them all with an open heart and with an open mind, especially because, as you know, a live stream show is kind of new for us. So I hope you understand the technical difficulties, if we have any, or the fact that we're in living rooms like mine with my collection of cookbooks. But I also hope that this show gives you a moment to feel more connected to your community and like things are a little bit normal. So the theme of tonight's show is belonging. And we wanted to focus on that because that is so important in this time. Stories of finding belonging with each other, finding ourselves, finding our homes. And it really focuses on a lot of shared values we have with hope, perseverance, generosity. And so we want to bring you these stories tonight. And with that, I would like to bring up our first teller, Stacy Sullivan, who has a story about finding himself growing up in the South. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you, Kaila. Happy to be here and welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Yeah, I live in Phoenix, Arizona now, but I grew up in West Monroe, Louisiana. And when you grow up in West Monroe, Louisiana in the 1980s, life revolves around a couple of things. One is the high school football team, and the second one is the First Baptist Church. And when you grow up as a gay man in the 1980s in small town Louisiana, you don't really think you're going to belong. You don't really think you're going to find a place that you belong. You don't really feel like you fit in. So you keep your head down, you go to high school, you do your best, you date girls, you go to college and you do the same thing. And you just know that you're going to get out and you're going to go and you're going to do different things and find a place where you feel like you belong. So I did that. I kept my head down to high school. I graduated from the University of Louisiana, my hometown university, and I graduated in 1987 with my shiny new journalism degree. And I was going places and I was going to do big things. And I got a great job 90 miles down the road in Shreveport, Louisiana. And not only in Shreveport, Louisiana, at the newspaper there, but at their bureau, which was about an hour outside the main newsroom. And when you're the bureau chief for a paper like the Shreveport, Louisiana Times, you cover everything. You cover about 5 or 6 parishes or counties as they are there in Louisiana. You cover everything. You cover whose house got flooded by the creek that rose too high. You cover who got thrown in jail the night before because they got too drunk. You write about everything, and you cover a lot of festivals, a lot of community celebrations. At that time in the 1980s, in Natchitoches, Louisiana, which is where I was the bureau chief, The biggest, you read a lot about Steel Magnolias because Steel Magnolias had been filmed there like a year earlier. So you read about where Dolly Parton slept or Sally Fields had lunch, and you read about all the festivals. And the biggest festival in town is always, every year still, is still the Natchitoches Christmas Festival. Like 50,000 people converge on this small town of about 15,000. And it's a great event. And the people are binging on meat pies on the riverfront, and they're binging on beer on the balconies, and everybody's having a good time. So that particular Christmas festival, I was covering. I was writing a story and covering the event and calling it in to the newsroom back in Shreveport. And after I got my story filed, I was hanging out on a balcony there on Front Street in Natchitoches, Louisiana, and I was introduced to this young man that I had seen around town, and I never really thought much about dating or trying to meet too many people in that town because I wasn't going to be there long. I was going places. I was going to try to find a place where I felt like I belonged and I kind of fit in better. But when I shook this guy's hand, church bells rang and fireworks went off. I mean, literally, because it was a Christmas festival and there were fireworks and church bells. And it was only a little awkward standing there on that balcony watching the fireworks show with his longtime girlfriend on one side of him and me on the other. So, undaunted, I invited the guy to lunch the next week, and he agreed to go. And we talked and talked and talked, and we realized that our background was a lot the same. His was the Methodist church, mine was the First Baptist church, relatively small towns in North Louisiana. So we talked and talked, and finally I just got down to business. I was just like, are you gay? Because if not, I didn't really have a lot of time to waste because I was headed on to other better, bigger things. To my surprise, he said yes. Well, he broke up with his girlfriend, and we started hanging out for the next few weeks. We started spending time together and getting to know each other better. And there's a little complication. I had kind of been dating somebody in New Orleans, a couple hours away, and we were breaking up. But before we started breaking up, we had booked this trip to Key West, and I was going to Key West because I'd never been. I wanted to go, so I didn't mind if we were breaking up. I was still going to go on this trip to Key West. So it was a New Year's trip, so I'd take off to Key West for this New Year's Eve celebration. The Christmas festival is always the first weekend of December, and New Year's Eve is a few weeks later, and so I go to Key West. It was before cell phones. It was before texting. It was before the internet. So I kind of spent a lot of time thinking about this guy with this great hair and this great smile that I'd been spending time with back at home. And then it was a really odd time in Key West, that trip. It was like freezing cold, and we had to cut down banana trees to try to stay warm. And banana trees don't really burn. They're full of water, if you don't know that. So it was just a really weird trip anyway. But anyway, flew back to New Orleans after Key West, got in my car to drive north to go back home and see my friend that I'd been spending time with. And it's a few hour drive. And along that drive back to the swamps of South Louisiana, back to Natchitoches, there's a big bridge, and it's a really big bridge. And it's over the intercoastal waterway, so it has to be tall enough for like ocean-going vessels to go over. So I start heading up this bridge, and I look down to adjust the radio or the heater or something, and I look up, and there is a giant roll of hay in my lane, and not a bale, but one of those giant rolls you see in pastures, and I can't avoid it. There's no shoulder. There's no way to get over. And I plow right through that thing. Yeah, in my little Honda Civic hatchback. So I get through it, and it happens so fast. It's one of those things that you think, did that really happen? Did I just plow through a giant bale of hay that was as big as my car? Well, I think, I survived. I'm okay. So I get to the top of that bridge, and I start heading down the other side, and I realize something's wrong, right? So I feel my car kind of dragging. So I kind of stop, pull over as much as I could, and look under the car. And of course, hay is packed underneath the car. I start pulling it out. I start trying to, fix the problem. Well, then I see smoke, and then I see spark, and then I see flames. So this is definitely not salvageable. So I pop the hatchback, I grab my bags, and I start heading down this bridge, down the other side of the bridge. Well, as I'm heading down to the base of the bridge where I see a convenience store, my car literally explodes behind me. I mean, it like in a movie. You just wouldn't believe. It's like, you don't think these things really happen, but it did. So I get to the bottom of that bridge to the convenience store, and the clerk behind the counter is obviously on the phone with the sheriff's deputy because, well, cars are exploding on the bridge, right? So I walk in, I'm really shell-shocked, and I don't know what to do. I don't know who to call. I'm in the middle of nowhere, it's middle of the night. So I think about the guy with the great hair and the great smile, and I call him. He answers and says he'll be right there to rescue me. So it's a couple of hours away still, so I have time to kill. The sheriff's deputy shows up. He's obviously bored too, cruising around the swamps of South Louisiana in the middle of the night. So he says, hop in. So I hop in, I drive around. He shows me where he lives. His wife is sick with the flu in their house. He shows me where he shoots rabbits, for fun. And then he loops me back to the convenience store where I'd left my bags. There was the guy with the great hair and the great smile, and he's there to rescue me. He called a friend, and they'd driven 2 hours to come down and pick me up. So I climbed in the back seat of his car, smelling like burned Honda Civic, maybe. I don't know. And we hit the road back home. And I'd like to say that there was some kind of revelation in the backseat of that car. I keep trying to remember if there was, but it wasn't a light bulb moment. It was just more of a moment of this is comfortable, and there's somebody I can call, and I really feel like it's a place where I belong. So thank you for listening to my story, and enjoy the show.
Stacy, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think you left something out about, that guy, right?
That guy?
Yeah.
Oh, that guy. Oh, okay. The big finale. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So we've been together 30 years. Sorry. And a month ago, we celebrated our 2-year wedding anniversary. Thank you.
That is lovely. Thank you so much I felt like you had to add that. I love your story because I love that you're talking about living authentically and being true to yourself. And, I've met your husband and I've seen your house, and clearly living authentically has paid off for you. So thank you for sharing your story with us.
I wouldn't know you. Thank you.
All right. So before we bring up our next storyteller for the night, I want to take a minute to tell you about one of the sponsors of tonight's show. Humana sponsors the Storytellers Project nationally and now virtually because they believe that sharing stories creates healthy people and healthy communities. They know that in times of uncertainty like this, feeling connected to each other and to our health is more important than ever. And they want everyone to know that as the COVID-19 situation changes, they are committed to the health and well-being of the communities that they serve. So if you want to learn more about what Humana is doing to help people, you can visit humana.com. All right, now let's bring up our second teller for the night, Lynn Ta, who has a story about being part of a restaurant family. Welcome, Lynn.
Off Northwest 86th Street in Clive lied an unassuming Vietnamese restaurant called Saigon Cafe. The restaurant, home to Vietnamese refugees in the 90s, was also home to me and my childhood. My early years consisted of running around the restaurant during lunch times. My friends were the customers that came in. My play space was behind the counter. Before a waiter would have a chance to clear off a leftover table, I would sneak bites of leftover food, making the grave mistake one time of mixing together sriracha and hot mustard. I would peel carrots with my dad back in the kitchen, and I would doodle on Chinese zodiac placemats. This was my childhood. I was a fun-loving, food-chowing kid that wanted nothing more than to hang out with random customers and sometimes be a nuisance to my parents. But I learned that my childhood was different from other kids. And of course, I first learned that lesson when I entered public school at the lunch table. During lunchtime, I was sitting around with the other kids, chatting it up first grade style. the question was asked, what is your favorite food? Well, kids shared their love of hamburgers and McDonald's infamous fries. I shared my love of pho and my favorite topping at the time, squid. There was a resounding ew at the table. Kids told me I should like better foods like hot dogs or macaroni and cheese. I kept trying to share the food that I loved at my parents' restaurant, but the ews just grew louder until I just stopped talking. At that moment, insulting the food that I loved was more than just that. It was an insult to me and my parents' livelihood. I became embarrassed of my parents' restaurant, and more experiences like that led me to become embarrassed about being Vietnamese. What I first learned to love not only grew to hate, but a hatred of myself. When I was in the 4th grade, I was walking in an empty hallway with my best friend when suddenly she turned to me and asked, "What's going on?" And I was crying. And I told her there was nothing more that I wanted than to be white and blonde. Fast forward, and it's my 12th birthday party. Now, I had this great party planned at the Family Fun Center where we were going to do arcade games and laser tag, but my parents had one request. Could we do food and cake at the restaurant instead of there? Of course, I tried to change their minds, but they were set. After all, it just made sense. Why would we buy pizza when we had a whole restaurant? So I begrudgingly agreed, and the party was set. The first dish that was brought out was my absolute favorite, egg drop soup. My dad had this special way of making it with these little bits of corn that just gave it this sweet taste that other restaurants didn't have. Across from me, my friend was suspiciously lifting and dropping the egg from her soup, not bringing it to her lips. She turned to me and asked, "Is this toilet paper?" I kept it in and I told her no. Despite my parents' best efforts, she didn't eat anything. We ended up going to the Family Fun Center later and we had a good time, but that was my breaking point. I was sick of being different. I was sick of being Asian. I vowed never to bring anybody to my parents' restaurant ever again. And that's just what I did. When they later sold the restaurant, I was devastated, but I didn't tell a single soul. Later, when I was in junior high, they bought another Chinese restaurant, but I chose to go later and work at Chick-fil-A instead. When my friends asked, "Hey, can we come to your parents' restaurant?" I diverted them to chicken nuggets and fries. Later, when they sold that restaurant, I hadn't brought a single soul there. But in high school, for the first time since entering the public school system, I met another Vietnamese girl, same age, same grade. She had actually eaten at my parents' restaurant and told me about slurping pho on the weekends with her friends. She told me and introduced me to another Chinese friend who introduced me to another friend. To be honest, growing up in Iowa, I was mostly surrounded by white people, but suddenly I had this group of people who could understand me, who could understand the angst and the frustration and the ostracization that I felt when people made fun of me for my culture and for my ethnicity. If you've ever felt marginalized and alone, and not just alone, but really alone, like you're in a room full of other people and you know that they're just right there and you reach out and try to grasp on and they're just at the edge of your fingertips, but still you can't grasp on and you feel like an empty speck, then you know how I felt when I was no longer a speck, but a human being. We had a name for ourselves. The Asian Mafia. Slowly, I started to learn how to like and love those parts of myself that I kept in. And through that, I learned to start talking to other people about my parents' restaurant and open up about my ethnicity and my culture. I learned that my teachers would go there every week to eat egg rolls and fried rice. I learned that even the mayor had eaten there as well. It's silly and it's almost embarrassing now to think about just how embarrassed I was about being different. Because being different is what makes us unique. It's what makes me, me, and you, you. The people who bought the restaurant from my parents later eventually sold it. I drove by there recently. The Wendy's next door is no longer there, and the Ryan's Buffet across the street also closed down. The restaurant is now called Nachos Tequila, and to be honest, I was devastated when I saw that. It felt like this childhood memory, this whole thing that I had gone through so much angst was suddenly gone. But it wasn't the restaurant it wasn't the building of the restaurant that was so special to me. It was the memories that I had made there. My family, my parents, the customers that came in. Those are what really made the memories special. And now I have a new margarita place. Thank you.
Lynn, thank you so much for that story. I really appreciate that you used something as universal as food, which we all have in common, to talk about something as sensitive as finding identity and, the transformative power of friendship. So thank you for your story. All right. So now I would like to bring up our third teller for the evening, Bethany Iser, who has a more sensitive story about enduring the unexpected. Welcome, Bethany.
Hi, I'm so happy to be with you tonight. Again, my name is Bethany Iser, and I am fully recovered from schizophrenia, and I have been for 12 years. And you might ask, well, what does that even mean? Well, I work, I volunteer, I enjoy meaningful relationships, I'm thriving in my life. But this was not supposed to happen. When I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2007, I was told I was permanently and totally disabled, that it was basically the end of my life. Fortunately, my doctors were wrong. I'd like to take you tonight through this journey from honor student, biochemistry major, violinist, through schizophrenia and homelessness, and then back again, reintegrated into society. I had a happy, normal childhood. My parents and my family lived on 5 acres of beautifully wooded land. I was very serious about violin, practicing 4 to 5 hours a day in high school. I was a member of the Cleveland Orchestra, Youth Orchestra, and the National Honor Society. Thought all the time about where I was going to go to college. And in 1999, I won a scholarship to study biochemistry at the University of Southern California. When I got to USC, I was very busy. I was taking very difficult classes. I was concertmaster of the community orchestra, and I was doing research. I remember one of my roommates said to me, Bethany, you live in a cave. You don't know what's going on socially here at the university. And she was right. All I did was work and study, and I didn't really have any friends. My parents were proud of my grades. My professors were proud of my research. No one ever dreamed that the root of my problem socially was emerging schizophrenia. And I blended in. My friends were hard workers. They studied. They were involved in many extracurricular activities. For 3 years, I did pretty well. I kept up my grades. But I was slowly losing my ability to focus, and I was looking for something more. In my junior year of college, my church decided to send a small team of young women to China. I got my first ever passport. I got my visa to visit China. And I went there to one of the poorest areas of the whole country in the South. And I saw people who were so poor, with only a few outfits, dirty, working hard in the fields. And I thought to myself, can I help 1 million people in China? And somehow deep inside of my mind, the answer was yes. I started to believe that I could. This was my first ever delusion. A delusion is a fixed false belief. When I came back from China, I was on fire. I wanted to travel again. This time I wanted to go to Africa. And I spent all my time hardly studying it at all. My grades were dropping, and I was planning this trip to go alone by myself to Nairobi, Kenya, Africa. And I got there that summer, and I saw the most beautiful, young, strong women with hopes and dreams, just like me. They were not stupid. They knew they were living in poverty. I got back from Africa. It was my senior year at the University of Southern California. I had had big dreams of becoming a researcher, a medical doctor, doing clinical trials. And I moved into my dorm room, got all my books, attended my lectures. I remember I took my first exam in a human genetics class, and I thought I just flew through this exam and had a perfect score. I had very high grades before. And I got back the exam, and I had failed the exam. I had essentially written gibberish for all of the answers. My mind was like this cloud or this broken record, and I could not move on. Here I am, unable to pass my classes and telling myself, I'm the next Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa didn't need a college degree. And here I am planning to travel again to become more like Mother Teresa. This time I was going to Thailand. I told my parents that I wanted to travel to Thailand, and they were so perplexed by the changes in my personality. And they gently told me they'd cut off my funding if I went to Thailand. And I was paranoid. I thought that they would stop me from becoming the next Mother Teresa, stop me from making a worldwide impact. And I went to Thailand, and I didn't speak with my parents again for 4.5 years. When I got back from Thailand, I wanted to go to Saudi Arabia. I spent lots of time looking for a visa online. How could I get there? Finally decided I was going to go to Egypt and then take ground transportation to Saudi Arabia. I had completely lost touch of reality. And in March, just a few months before I was going to graduate, I decided I just needed to get on a plane and fly to Egypt. Didn't have enough money to do it. I'd maxed out my credit cards going to Thailand. So I decided to fly halfway. I got on a plane from LA and flew to Boston, where I was hoping to meet an imaginary person at the airport. I waited for 15 hours for a stranger to show up and meet me in the airport. I wondered who would be meeting me. I wondered if it would be my future husband. I wondered if it would be a donor who would help me fly all over the world. And when I got back from my disappointment in Boston, I had already turned in my keys to my dormitory, and I had nowhere to go. I started spending every night living in the university library. I had my ID. The university staff would come to me in the middle of the night and say, are you a student? You don't look like a student. We want to see your ID. And I showed them that ID that I was so proud of. I was in that library regularly for 3 years. And then one day, January 28th of 2006, I was sitting at a park bench on the university campus when all of a sudden I hear this chorus of children's voices and students' voices. Inside of my mind, there was a boy and a girl coming out of the choir telling me that I was dirty and I was homeless and I was stupid. And then they changed and they talked about how I would be the next Mother Teresa. I would marry a billionaire and be politically powerful. A few days later, I was taking a shower at a friend's house, and there were 3 men who were able to see me through the window, and they kept making these inappropriate comments about me and my body. while I was taking a shower. So I got out of the shower to see these 3 guys. And there was no window. And so I'm looking for a sunroof. I want to see where these 3 men are coming from. No sunroof. I finally started to realize these men were not there. One day I looked in the mirror to see my reflection, but it was morphed to look like the character Lisa from the show The Simpsons. One day I walked by a library where I tried to study, and the name of the library was changed by just 1 letter. On March 3rd of 2007, it was my 4th year anniversary of becoming homeless. Even though I didn't know what day it was, couldn't check the date on a newspaper without hallucinating, and the voices were so irritating inside of my mind that I screamed. It was like I was in pain, and when I least expected it, a police officer came, snuck up on me, picked me up, and told me I was being taken to a psych ward. I was so relieved. I thought, there's nothing wrong with me. They'll let me out right away. I got to the psych ward. They asked if I wanted to speak with my parents, and I said yes. Got in medication, had terrible side effects, flew back to Ohio from LA to recover at my parents' home. And I was so sure I didn't need this medication with bad side effects. I went off it after 2 weeks. I was in the hospital again. And my doctor threw me a lifeline. He said, do you remember studying biochemistry and playing the violin? You might be able to get that back, but you must always stay on your medication. It took 5 medications over 12 months. And yes, it did really feel like I was hopeless. And it really did feel like the first doctor was right and I was permanently and totally disabled. But that was not the end. Finally, a new doctor tried me on an underutilized medication called clozapine. After 6 months, the voices were gone. And after 12 months, I was talking about going back to the university. Had my first class at the University of Cincinnati, got my A, and graduated in 2011 with high honor. In 2014, 2 years later, I published my memoir, Mind is Strange. In 2016, my doctor and I founded the Cures Foundation, which stands for Comprehensive Understanding via Research and Education into Schizophrenia, to do schizophrenia education and advocacy. One of our initiatives is to feature schizophrenia survivors, other people like me, who are thriving. They're doing remarkably well despite a schizophrenia diagnosis. I am recovered, but not cured. I hope to stay on my medication for the rest of my life. And I do not consider my schizophrenia to be a life sentence. Thanks to many useful conversations with my doctor and the right medication, I have reclaimed my life. And I'm thankful every day for this new chance I have at life in my recovery. Thank you.
Wow, Bethany, thank you so much for such a powerful, thoughtful story on what I'm sure was a difficult experience. And thank you for sharing such a strong story of overcoming and for the work you do on behalf of your community. So thank you again. That makes me want to thank the coaches who have helped make these stories possible. Every storytelling you're hearing tonight has worked for hours with coaches, and the coaches are journalists who work at papers across the country for Gannett. So I want to thank the coaches who worked with the tellers for this show. They are at the Ventura County Star, the Des Moines Register, and the Arizona Republic. So thank you for the journalists who have coached these tellers, and thank you to the tellers for spending so much time working on sharing your stories with us tonight. Viewers, if you want to support the journalists who make this happen and the powerful journalism they do in their communities, you can subscribe to one of more than 260 papers across the country. I think they'll drop information in the chat for a link where you can learn more about that. All right. Now I'd like to bring up our fourth teller for the night. It's a little bit of a change of pace. His name is Anwar Newton, and he has a story about an adventure in downtown Phoenix.
Hi. How's everybody doing? About 6.5 years ago, I used to work as security at a local dive bar. Often when I worked these shifts, I didn't eat a good dinner before I started my shift. And at the end of this shift, around 2:30 a.m., I realized I needed some food. So I waited getting paid out, and I started thinking about what was available to me at 2:30 a.m. in the morning that was even a little bit healthy. I got my money. I got to my 98 Honda Accord LX hatchback, and I started the trek down to my house. And I realized on the way home, there was a Circle K gas station. I decided to stop there, pick up a few snacks, and I knew exactly what I was going to get. So I had the great idea to park my car in the front of the entrance, and you know what? I'll leave the engine running because this will be a quick trip inside. I go inside and I get food that my body doesn't need or deserve. I ended up getting 5 taquitos and 2 bags of Haribo gummy bears, and I plop it down on the desk where the cashier is, and I'm looking around. The cashier is not at the front desk. A little apprehensive about my decision, I look back at my car, still running, headlights on, and it was still there. The cashier was in the back of the store by the soda fountain machine cleaning. Noticed me and started hobbling towards the cashier's desk as if both of his ankles had been broken, and now I'm getting a little agitated. I look back at my car a second time. It's still there, still running. He finally rings my items up, and I bid him adieu. I go out the front door. I head to my car, and as I approach the driver's side of my vehicle, I realized that there was a man sitting inside my car. And upon further inspection, that man was not me. So this was all wrong. This is not how things should go. A little startled, I decided to knock on the driver's side window as to figure out what was going on. I knocked on it so politely as if I was disrupting this person who was in my car. And with the most apathetic of reactions, the dude turned to me, looked me right in the eyes and shrugged, and went back to fiddling below the steering wheel and the gear shift. I realized at this point that I'm about to get my car stolen. And that's exactly what then happened as the car backed up out of the space, and I saw my entire life savings leaving my life. I'm not a rich man. I've got in my possession this 98 Honda Accord LX. I've got 5 taquitos. I've got 2 bags of Haribo gummy bears. This is all I'm worth. So I get on the phone, which has about 2% battery, and I start dialing the cops. I dial 9, and as I dial that, I hear my car rev up, and then it stopped, and the engine cut off. And then I hear it start back up again. And I dial 1, and I hear my car rev up and then stop, and the engine cut off, and then I heard it cut back on again. And just as I'm about to dial the last one to get the cops, the engine cuts off again, the engine stops, and the person gets out of the car. And at this point, I'm thinking, oh, this is where this guy's gonna shoot me. But what came next surprised me. He said, hey, man, hey, tell me how to drive this car. And then I realized I had the best anti-theft system known to man. I had manual transmission in my car, and this person didn't know how to drive it. So I start to calm down. I size this person up. It was a young African-American man, light-skinned. He resembled a young T.I., the rapper, or a young Harry Belafonte for the older generation. I know when I work security at the bar, the best way to resolve situations is to be a little bit diplomatic, to be a little bit more calm. And so I asked him, hey, what's going on, man? Are you all right? You just tried to steal my car. And he goes, he's like, man, I just need a ride. I really need a ride. Can you give me a ride down the street? And I said, hey, man, I'll give you a ride down the street, but you got to give me a couple of promises before we make this trip. You got to promise you're not going to stab me or shoot me, or we're both going to get there safe, something like that. And he goes, yeah, I will. And I said, okay, well, I'll give you a ride. Now, I hoped he would get out of the driver's seat, go around the front of the car to the passenger side and realize that was locked. And I would hop in the car and I would just drive off. That was it. I would go home. I would leave him in the parking lot and I would go home. But instead, he climbed inside the car and over the center console. And I was like, man, I get inside the car, I put my snacks down, and then I start the car back up, and in a weird sense of Stockholm syndrome, I start teaching this kid how to drive my car. You know, I'm going, you got a gear shift. You have to put the clutch in. That's the difference between automatic and manual. Now, where did you need me to drop you off at? Now, originally, I remember him mentioning that he needed to go to 12th Street in Indian School, which was right next to where we were. And then in that moment, he changed the address to 48th Street in Baseline. Now, if you're not from Phoenix, this is a far stretch in location. It's about an 8-mile difference. And not knowing how to get this person out of my car or what he was capable of, I still didn't know if he had a weapon. I merged into the highway and I start trying to figure out a situation to end this. I came up with one plan. I said, first cop I see on the highway, I'm the drunkest driver on the road. That'll be the easiest way to get some attention to what's going on. And when you know, for the entire ride, no police. I get off at the exit 48th Street. I start to head south. And what do you know? There's another Circle K coming up. And I decide I have to go into the Circle K. I cannot go to where he needs me to go. That's where the killing's going to start. I get into the Circle K. I park my car at a gas pump, and I try to get him to go inside. During the trip, I realized he had a medical bracelet on one wrist, and I started to understand that he was very young. He was a 17, 18-year-old kid, and he was a little bit scatterbrained. He seemed a little lost. He seemed a little out of it, but I still wanted the situation to end. I asked him if he wanted to get anything in the store. He's like, no, I'm fine. And I go, okay. I get out, and I say, well, do you need anything in the store? And he goes, get me a pack of cigarettes. As if this night wasn't costing me enough, he wanted the most expensive thing in the store. I walked to the Circle K, and I go up to the cashier, and it was a little old white lady, and I said, hey, I'm being carjacked by the guy at gas pump number 4. I need you to call the cops. I'm going to walk back, get a water and a couple other things. And when I get here, we're going to get the cops here. But if the man in the car at gas pump 4 gets out and walks over here, we are not talking to the cops. She goes, got it. I go get a water. I return to the cashier. The cops are on the line. We start to give the description, the location, what's going on. I'm being carjacked. Please send help. And at that moment, he enters the front doors of the Circle K. The cashier drops the phone. We pretend like we're having a normal transaction. He walks up to the desk and he goes, hey, can I get some cigarettes? And knowing the full scope of the situation, the cashier gave him a most brutal reaction, goes, do you have ID? And I'm just like, whoa. At that very moment, 3 uniformed police officers came in. And the quickest reaction time I've ever seen by the armed forces in America, the cops showed up in 4 minutes flat. I was very thankful. And then I remembered the description, African-American, and I start pointing to him because we were the only 2 in there. I didn't want them to get it confused. It was not me, it's this guy over here. They apprehend him. They put his arms behind his back. They empty his pockets. They bring out all of my belongings that he'd been pocketing while we were in the ride from my glove compartment and the side of my car. And then I go out and the officer makes sure I have all my belongings as I recover some of the things he had taken. And I start to calm down. I'm like, I've got everything. This is it. And he goes, do you want to press charges? And I said, nah, I just want to go home. I get in my car and I back out and I start to head out the parking lot and I glance over. All my windows are down. I glance over at the 3 officers with the kid on the ground, with not handcuffed, but sitting there. And as I'm leaving the parking lot, I hear him yell, hey man, thank you for helping me. And I thought in that moment, did I help him? Because I hope I did. Thank you.
Anwar, thank you so much for that story. That is wild, and I appreciate that you can tell it with humor.
Thank you. Well, it wasn't funny at the time, but
I can imagine. All right, well, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, so unfortunately, we were supposed to have a fifth teller for the night, but it is my understanding she is having technical difficulties. Her name is Sierra Holmes, and she was going to share a story about finding a path to self-love. I do not believe she will be able to make it, unfortunately, but I think the producers are going to try to find a way to record her story and share it on our Facebook, so you can find it there. So with that, I would like to bring up all the tellers for the night to say thank you and to take a bow for sharing their stories. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Imagine the
Thank you.
crowd going, woo, woo.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I forgot to thank the Cincinnati Enquirer earlier. They also helped coach tonight's stories. So viewers, please let us know what you thought about this show by leaving us a comment wherever you're watching. You can tell us what you thought of the stories, the show itself. Any feedback you give helps us make these shows better. And if you enjoyed the show and you want to see them happen more often, you can follow the Storytellers Project on Facebook, on YouTube. If you want to hear some stories from previous shows, oh my goodness, wait. I just got news that Sierra is on the line. So please welcome up our final teller for the night, Sierra Holmes, who has a story about finding self-love. Hi, Sierra.
Hello, everyone. You gotta love technology. Thank you for allowing me to be in your home this evening. When I was 11 years old, I was faced with the reality that our society didn't believe that all bodies were created equal. You see, I was headed to my first sleepover, and I was so excited because we were going to the mall. And I love shopping with my mom, but this was the mall, and I was going to be able to hang out with my friends and a chaperone. And the first store that we decided we were going to go to was a store called 579. Now, if you're familiar with that store, you know that they carried, you guessed it, sizes 5, 7, and 9. And at this time in my life, it was still really cool to look like everybody else. So of course, my friends and I all wanted to have matching outfits. So I see them start to pick out shirts and skirts, and I start going through the racks, and I'm going through the racks, and I'm going through the racks, and I realize everything stops at a size 9. And at the time, I was a size 11. It was the first time that I had ever stood in a store and had to realize nothing in the store was made to fit me. I felt left out, I felt alone, and I felt unvalued. But don't worry, this is not a sad story, everybody. You see, I had women in my life that were going to make sure that moment was just a moment. The women in my life made the extraordinary seem ordinary. Like my grandmother, who was a true fashionista. I mean, this woman would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do her hair and get her outfits together. I remember she had what seemed like 1,000 hat boxes. And she had this walk-in closet that had all of these textures and colors. And in the way back, I remember she had this temperature-controlled area for her furs. I mean, what? And I just loved to play in there, until she kicked me out. But what I loved most is even though she was such a fashionista, this was still the same woman who was cooking us breakfast on the weekends and keeping us company while our parents were at work. It's all about balance, she said. It's all about being a boss, I say. And then there was my mom. And my mom, she was a style icon in her own right. She really believed that being unique was best. So she really didn't want to wear anything that looked like something someone else was wearing. I really feel like she peaked in the 60s and 70s where color was running rampant and hoop earrings and hair were larger than life. But one of the most important things I learned from my mom was never settling. And that couldn't have come any more clearer than when it was time for us to go prom shopping. Prom is so important when you're a teenager, right? Hopefully a lot of you have been there. It's when you're going to get your hair done and your nails done, and you're going to get dressed up and you're going to hang out with your friends. And it's just a magical night to be young and wild and carefree. But you see, for me, my prom shopping experience was just a little bit different from that of my straight size friends, where I felt every billboard, every magazine, and every storefront was telling them, come shop here. You are so worthy. Your body is beautiful. I again felt left out, alone, and unworthy. I even remember walking in a department store, and I had to walk by what seemed like thousands of dresses in different colors and textures and all the sequins. And it was like walking the walk of shame to the back of the department where there was about a handful of dresses in my size. And these weren't ornate dresses by any means. They all pretty much had the same cut, and they pretty much all followed the same color story. And as I was trying on these dresses, I remember my mother turned to me and she said, do you love these dresses? And I said, I mean, they're okay. They're okay. And she said to me, why would we buy a dress that you don't love? And that simple question stopped me in my tracks because I didn't really have an answer. I just was used to shopping what I could find. You know, I had a realization when I was younger that that was going to be a part of my reality. So I explained that to her, and she said, if you don't love this dress, let's take a ride. So off we went, and my mother took me to a friend's boutique who had connections with a garment maker in Hawaii. This is a true story. And after my mother and her exchanged a few words, she handed me a catalog, and inside of it, there were a lot of different dresses, but they were totally customizable. I could change the arm length. I could add arm sleeves if I wanted, the hemline, the neckline, the beadwork, the color. I could really make it my own. And my mother said, I want you to find a dress in here that you like, and I want us to customize it and make it a dress that you love. Now, the budget for this dress, 2 to 3 times the amount of my original budget for my dress for prom. But my mom told me, in this moment, we are not going to settle. So the boutique owner took my measurements, and she took my selections from the catalog, and off they went to Hawaii. And 4 to 6 weeks later, I had my first custom piece. And to be honest with you guys, I honestly had never felt more beautiful than I did in that gown. And that was a turning point for me. That idea of never settling was going to become a part of my journey. And I no longer worried about the tag, the size inside of a garment. I paid more attention to fabrics and color, and I didn't want society to dictate how I looked anymore. I wanted to make sure that the clothing that I wore really represented my personality. And my friends and family started to take notice and tell me how much they loved my style. And eventually this became my job, and I became a stylist. I had clients that loved how I dressed, always told me they wanted me to come to their home and dress them every day, that they wished that I could buy every piece of their clothing for their wardrobe. And they would always tell me how much they wished they had my confidence. You know, and it was that last part that really stuck with me because I realized confidence had nothing to do with size. It was a mindset. It was a mindset. My mother had that mindset. And about 4 years ago, she passed away. One of her dying wishes was for me to follow my dreams and to never settle. So I started a blog. I thought, you know, let me take my passion for writing and my passion for fashion and let me marry the two. And maybe 5, 10, 15 of my friends will read this thing, but I'll create a space where I can just be me. Never would I have imagined that 4 years later, not only do the women in my inner circle pay attention to my blog, but I have women across the state, the country, and the world who have joined me on this journey. Eclectic Curves is a plus-size fashion, family, and lifestyle website dedicated to reminding women of all sizes that we are amazing just the way that we are, and we shouldn't be put in a box. I'm so honored that so many people have joined me on this journey, and honestly, I'm so honored that I have become the woman that I needed when I was 11 years old. It's crazy how things come full circle. And you know, I'm still on my own body positivity journey, and I probably will be for the rest of my life. But I'll tell you this, I have realized that my key ingredient in the recipe of feeling beautiful is to never settle. What's your key ingredient? Thanks.
Sierra, thank you so much for that story and for introducing us to your mom. What a blessing. When I think tellers, usually I try to highlight something that's universal in that story, but instead I want to go specific. I had the exact same experience as a big kid shopping at 579, and the exact same experience of having to realize I don't have to buy it just because it fits me. So thank you so much for that story. That was fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so glad you could make it. Let's bring up all the tellers one more time so we can give them a thank you for being on the show tonight. Woo!
Thanks, guys.
I know Lynn had to drop off because she had another engagement, but thank you to all 5 tellers for telling tonight. Like I said earlier, everyone who's watching, please feel free to leave a comment telling us what you thought of the show or what you took away from the show for that matter. And that will help us improve. If you want to learn more about the Storytellers Project, you can follow it on Facebook, on YouTube, or you can look up the Storytellers Project podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can hear more of our favorite stories from across the country. All right, that's it for our show tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.